Hello everyone, it's time for another track breakdown. In this one, I'm going to break down my remix of Raum and The Wash, Final Round. The remix came out last summer, 2019, on Yang Recordings. It's one of my favorite remixes I've done so far, and it's been one of my best performing tracks as far as sales and streams and support from other artists and whatnot. So I thought it would be a fun one to do. What we're going to do is start with this initial ideas project here, and then we'll move on to the arrangement project and really, look at the arrangement and the elements that aren't present in this project. The reason I want to start with this one is because a lot of times what I'll do is I'll get an 8 or 16 bar loop going, an initial idea, and then before I move to the arrangement, I'll bounce out some parts to audio. So there's some parts that are in the arrangement phase that are in audio that I want to show you exactly how I processed and put together in this one. So we're going to start here and then move to the other project. One other thing to note is that the track's not mixed, it's not mastered, so it's going to sound a little different than the final version that you may be used to. But let's have a quick little preview of what this initial ideas loop sounds like. There you go. So I'm excited to break this down for you. I think there's going to be lots of nice little tidbits and tips and tricks in here that you can, take with you and maybe try out in your own production. So let's dive in. Let's get to it. I'm just going to go through all of these elements one by one. So we'll start with the kick. Just a basic kick here, kind of an 808 style low end with a nice kind of clicky transient. This is a kick I've used in a few tracks, and I don't think I did anything to it because it's already treated and already ready to go. Yeah, absolutely no processing on it. So if you want some more insight on how I like to layer and process and treat kicks, I've done a few videos on it which are available for free on my YouTube channel. So I will direct you there if you want to learn more about that. Same with this snare loop here. This is a snare loop that I've made some time ago that I still like to use, and I can't remember exactly how I've made it because it's been so long. I think it's multiple samples layered together and then treated. Again, I've done videos on this in depth on my YouTube channel, so I'll direct you there as well for this one if you want to learn more about putting together custom snare and clap loops. But this loop, this snare loop, is going through this clap group, which is being sent through this plate reverb here. It's kind of a simple plate reverb setting preset that I kind of maybe will use sometimes as a starting point for snares and claps. So really basic. The decay might change depending on the tempo. I might play around a little bit with the pre-delay and the low and high cut, but really basic, just a plate reverb there just to give the snare and some of the other layers that we'll talk about in a second a little bit of ambience, some space, and some liveliness. Okay, so the next thing we have is this rim shot. Just a really short, tight rim. So if we look at this snare loop, there's actually, it's got some width to it. Okay, and I just wanted something to kind of sit in the center that was, pretty much mono, that would layer nicely with that snare loop. So I took this rim shot, which was one of the samples provided in the remix pack, and I just tightened the envelope right up. So if we just find that rim, yeah, without the tight envelope, and then with just tightened it right up. I just wanted that little initial hit there. So really tight envelope, and then I've just added a little touch of distortion and then some EQ. The EQ just to roll off the low end that I didn't need, and also took a little bit off the top. Not a huge difference there, pretty subtle. And that's also, you know, running through that same plate reverb I just showed you. Okay, the next thing we have is this clap accent, which happens at the end of every 4 bars. And there's some interesting things happening here. So I'm going to find that. So I just found a nice clap sample that I liked. I made a copy of it. I panned one left, I panned one right. Let's have a look at the piano roll here. So I wanted to really accentuate the width. So if you use this technique where you pan a sample hard left and hard right, you need to make some changes to them. Otherwise, the panning is doing nothing. So I pitched one of the samples down, one semitone, and then I've just offset the timing a little bit. So they're both slightly before the grid, slightly before the kick, but one is just nudged a little bit further than the other. And the difference in the timing and the pitch really accentuates the width, and it makes a really nice wide accent. And then there's just a little bit of processing on this. So this isn't doing anything. This is just a control that allows me to play with the decay of both of these samples with just this one knob, so I don't have to fiddle with them in their individual samplers. So that's all that is. And then just a little bit of distortion here with the wave shaper. Okay, and then we have this flicker. So there's a lot of processing on this little guy here. So I'm just going to mute everything. Here's what it sounds like. This was just, excuse me, a percussion loop that was part of the sample pack. And I really wanted to turn this into like a pretty signature kind of groove element. I really liked it, but I wanted to put my own flavor and spin on it. So first of all, what I did was I found kind of like an interesting little loop here. So I kind of used some like kind of polyrhythm techniques. So what I've done is I've just looped this up over 3 beats. But instead of like keeping that polyrhythm going, I've reset it every 2 bars. So we have the 3 beats, and then I've just reset it at the end of 2 bars instead of continuing the polyrhythm, which just makes it just, yeah, that's what I felt worked best with the track. So kind of an interesting little loop going on here. Just kind of give it a polyrhythm type feel, but because it's resetting every 2 bars, it's not like too chaotic and all over the place, which sometimes polyrhythms can be, but I just wanted that kind of polyrhythm type feel. So let's just go through all the processing here. I'll just go through everything one by one. So the first thing I did was add this driver. And I used a preset on this one called telephone voice. So that's what it sounds like normally. I just really thought that worked quite nice and just gave it kind of a unique kind of, little touch there. Then I've added some reverb, or excuse me, some delay. Just a basic 8th dotted setting with some saturation, 30% on the mix. Basic stuff here. And then I followed that with a little bit of this space modulator from Valhalla, this Lush Verb presets I tend to use quite often. This kind of gives it a, kind of a chorusy, reverb space, just a little bit there, just 6% on the mix. And then we're driving this with the blood overdrive. Just, yeah, really basic, just kind of beefing it up a little bit, giving it some attitude. And then I'm compressing it to, again, just really kind of, you know, take this little loop to the next level, give it some more girth. Okay, and then I'm just adding an EQ here, rolling off some of the lows and the top, and then the peak controller is modulating something. I'm not sure what, to be honest. Maybe one of these parameters, like, might be on the drive. Yeah, so it's just slightly modulating the color, which just, you know, gives a slight bit of movement to the kind of, it just changes kind of the texture and where the focus of this drive is occurring, but it's just happening over a very kind of small range, but it just gives a slight change to the sound's texture. And then a little bit of sidechain here just to keep things in check. And there we go. Then we have this nice kind of like really interesting, like atmospheric, rhythmic percussion loop. There's also some automation here. So we have a little bit of automation with the mix of the space mod, very subtle. And then we're playing with the saturation on the delay. And then I'm also see the depth of the space mod. So yeah, just modulating a few parameters here as well, just to give it a little bit of movement kind of towards the end of the phrase. Yeah, pretty basic, but it's a pretty important little loop in the track. I think it really adds to the groove. So then we have this tom drum here. Okay, so the tom drum, we'll have a quick look at that. This is just like a basic 808 tom with this simple little pattern here. And that's playing every other bar. Really simple. I mean, nothing too crazy here. Little change, some small changes to the velocity to give it a little groove. And we'll just have a look at the. So this is kind of a similar chain that I like to use with this particular tom drum. I like to use it a lot. So we have this omega N just to give it a little saturation is all that's really doing here. And then a little bit of compression on that tom. This DBX compressor, I really like what it does to the front end of percussion samples, especially if I want to kind of accentuate like the transient a little bit. This is usually the compressor I like to try first. So without the compressor and with. It just brings out that transient in a really nice way. So I have just a little saturation, we got the compressor there, and then I'm just rolling off some of the low end that I don't need, and that's it on that. And then just a little bit of auto pan to give it a little bit of movement, and then some sidechain. Okay, so that's the tom drum, and then that is being answered by this little kick accent here, which is muted, so you hear it there. Just little kick sample right, yeah, on the 16th note right before beat 2, just to add to the groove. And that was, I think, a kick that was from the sample, the remix pack. And I don't really think I did much to this at all. I think I just left it the way it is because it already sounded good. So that was just kind of, you know, in there, low in the mix, just to add to the groove. Okay. And then we have this texture here. And the texture sounds like this. And I think this was a loop that I found that I just used a little snip of that I thought just worked really well in the context of this groove, if I remember right. And then I just added some processing to it. So we have a pretty aggressive low cut without that low cut. Yeah, there's lots of low end in that. So really thin that out. I didn't want all that stuff down there. And then we have this. I just pitched it down 1 semitone, thought it sat better there. And then I'm using the transient master from Native Instruments to really kind of clean it up and take a lot of the sustain out and add a little touch of attack. Yeah, you get lots of kind of, you know, dusty fuzz and sustain that I didn't necessarily want in this. So this is a nice way to clean up loops, is using a transient designer. And then we have a little bit of reverb here to give it a little bit of space. I'm just using like a small ambient setting, 10% on the mix, and then some sidechain on this. But that, yeah, that reverb gives it a nice space. And that just kind of helps fill out the groove. Okay. Looks like there's some automation here as well. So we have a little rise over 16 bars with the reverb, and then that just resets. These are, you know, little bits of automation that I'll do, especially if I plan on bouncing these little like groove elements out. I tend to kind of work in some LFOs or some automation to give it a little bit of life and movement before I bounce it out to an audio clip. And then we also have the sustain, probably the sustain with the transient master, I'm assuming. Yeah. Just a little bit of movement with the sustain with that transient master, again, to just give it a little bit of extra movement. Okay. So now we have this hi-hat here. Just a basic offbeat hi-hat that I made years ago that I still like to use sometimes. So there's really nothing happening there. It's just a basic offbeat kind of noise hi-hat. And then we have this short hat, which is doing its thing just on the offbeat, layered with this hat here. There is some processing. We have a little bit of a little subtle distortion, really subtle. Rolling off the low end, rolling off some of the tippy top, and then a little bit of the Valhalla room on this. Just give it a little bit of space. And that was just meant to kind of layer with this main offbeat hat here. If we look at the image, this one is fairly mono, So again, this one is very wide. So I wanted kind of something to kind of sit in the middle that would work well playing with this one. Having, you know, contrast is important. Next thing we have is this shaker loop. Okay, so this one, let's just hear the shaker on its own. Okay, we'll hear it. So the shaker was a loop that was provided with the sample pack, but I wanted again to change it, alter it, kind of make it my own. So here's what I did to it. I took the shaker loop and I panned one left. I, made a copy, panned one hard left and hard right. And what I do sometimes, this is something that I like to do often actually, especially with remixes, is I'll take a loop like this, but I'll make a copy of it and pan one hard left and hard right, but I'll play them in different sequences. So I'll kind of rearrange the loop on the left and the right so they're playing in different sequences to kind of, make a nice wide loop here. So that's what I did here. You can see the left side is actually playing over a half note, and this one's looping over a quarter note. And they're probably, they're playing in different parts, different sequences, because there's subtle differences in that loop throughout. So if I, loop the first part of that, I think it was maybe an 8-bar loop or something. If I loop just the first part on the left over a half note and maybe take a section from the end of the loop and have that be looping over a quarter note playing on the right, we're going to get some nice some width there because there's changes, there's difference in the left and the right side. So that's what I've done, and it's a nice way to really kind of take a loop and rearrange it, and it's not going to sound odd, or it's going to sound like it belongs together because it's the same loop, just kind of reworked. So I did that just to give a little bit of my own flair to it, and then I put these through a group, which I've added some additional processing. So they're both going through this group, and they're getting a little bit of this defacer plugin, which apparently, as you can see, I like to use sometimes. So a little subtle distortion, some flanging on this one as well. So what it sounds like without, and then with. And then we also have a little bit of filter mod on the top, just some movement with that high cut, and then cutting the lows as well. So there you go. That's the shaker loop. And now we have this noise hat here. So I actually only ended up using this like very, very sparingly in the actual arrangement, but it was just, sometimes when I'm building a loop like this, sometimes I don't even use some of the parts. Sometimes I end up just, using some parts very sparingly, like in just a few little spots. It just depends on how the arrangement goes. But I did end up using this in the arrangement, and we'll see how I used it later. But have this noise hat here. Let's just play it. So it sounds like solo. Let's have a look at the actual pattern. Yeah. Pretty simple, some slight variance with the velocity to give it a little extra groove. Okay, nothing else happening there. And let's see what's triggering that. I think it's 3x OSC. Nope, it's a sample. Okay, just a sample there. A nice tight envelope on this. I think there's also, yeah. So as far as processing goes, we have some delay here. Which is a very important, component to this sound. It really gives it the groove. So I think it's just an 8th dotted, quite simple there. We have a little tremolator, which is giving it a little extra movement. And then some EQ, rolling off the lows, a little bit of the top on this one as well. I think I must have been experimenting with some panning and decided not to use it. We have some sidechain on this. And then there's a LFO on the decay, which just gives it some movement. And then an LFO on the decay speed, which is something that's interesting to do sometimes. So if we have a look at the noise hat, so this is happening. Okay, so let's see here. All right, so this is something that I like to do sometimes. So I'll set up like an LFO like that, and the LFO is, yeah, only being turned on every other bar. So here, the amount you can see is, yeah, is 0 with the amount here. The volume is the amount, and this is a random shape. So every other bar, I'm turning that on. So we have kind of like a question and answer type of thing going on. And then at the end of 8 and 16 bars, I'm just increasing the amount a little bit. So the randomness has, there's going to be more of a chance for that random LFO for the decay to open up even further towards the end of the phrases. So quite simple, but a nice little way to just, add some additional movement to a sound like this, keep it interesting, and also kind of have it, really help with the turnarounds into the next phrase by increasing the LFO amount. And then doing a similar thing with the release, pretty much the same thing with the release here of the envelope. And then we're just playing a little bit with the feedback amount of the delay at the end of the phrase here. So again, just little bits of automation, using LFOs and automation to give these sounds, some more movement and life. So pretty simple. That is that noise hat. And we have this tambourine here. So I think this is just a tambourine loop that I have somewhere in my sample library. I added a little bit of distortion with the driver. Used this preset called Dusty Needle, maybe tweaked it a little bit without it. With. Okay. And then again, EQ, rolling off the lows and some of the top end too. Look like there's a little bit too much top end on this one. Yeah. Adding some phasing, mixed quite low, just to give it a little subtle modulation. some subtle auto panning just to give it a little bit more movement, and then some sidechain. Okay, so that's it on the tambourine. And then we have this tam verb here, which I used very subtly in the arrangement, but it's literally just a copy of this tambourine, but just ran through a reverb at 100% and then heavily sidechained. And then I just EQ'd it slightly differently. And then we can look at how I use that in the arrangement. Originally, I just wanted to kind of give this so yeah, that's a tambourine reverb. And then we have the bass here. Okay, the bass is super simple. So as far as, let's just look at the pattern really quick. I just literally took like a piece or a one shot from the bass that was from the original track and then made my own groove with it. So I think I just snipped out a one shot and then made my own simple groove here. And then just added a little touch of compression here and some sidechain. That's it. Nothing fancy on the bass. I mean, and the compression is just barely moving. I mean, it's just subtle. Just probably more just to give it a little extra character, really. It's not really doing much compression at all, to be honest. But I just think sometimes bass, or a lot of times, bass can sound really nice running through the 1176. But there you go. And then we have this sub here, which is just mixed in. So again, this came from, yeah, this was part of the original track, and I just cut out one of these sub hits and just layered it in, just mixed it in so it's coming in right before this hit here, just to give the bass another element and just add to the low end groove of the track. It's mixed really low, but it does make a difference, I think. So we'll just hear the bass and the kick on its own. So you hear it, yeah. Without it, you miss it when it's gone, but it is quite subtle, and I didn't do anything to that. It already sounded good, so I just added a little sidechain to it. That's all I did. Okay, that's the sub, and then we have these kind of melodic elements here. So we have this synth groove. Which is a really nice driving element of this track. This was, again, a piece from the original track. And what I did was I just cut out a section and I looped it. I think it was a longer loop. I cut out a half bar loop and looped that up that I thought sounded nice. And then I processed it from there. So originally, without any processing, it sounds like this. And I think, yeah, it was a much like longer loop, if I remember right. Oh, I made it unique as its own little clip, so I couldn't tell you, but I'm almost 100% positive it was a longer loop. So I cut out a little half bar section, looped that up, and then processed it from there. So we added some distortion. I added some EQ and cutting off the lows. I'm adding quite a bit of mids on this. Yeah, I just wanted to rebalance this. I wanted it to be more focused up in the mid range, so I did some EQ work there and then gave it some more groove with this delay. One of my favorite delays, the H delay. 8th dotted setting, mix is quite high, 60%. And that really kind of makes it start to dance and just kind of groove. And then some sidechain. There you go. So we have that nice little kind of synth groove there, and then this basic pad. Which this also was from the original. I think I just cut out a section of it and just filtered it down. It already sounded good. I didn't need to do a bunch of work to this, so I just used the Moog to, you know, filter it in and out of the track. So there you go. This was the initial ideas loop for this remix, and then I took it from there. I started arranging it. I added more parts. I added effects. We'll look at all of that in detail in just a second. I'll see you in the other project. Here we go.